Welcome everybody. It's our monthly spirituality salon at Oracle Temple, which is part of Oracle Campus. And tonight we have really a special guest, Tahil Sharma, and he is with United Religions Initiative. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He is from India, and his father is Hindu, his mother is Sikh. And after the shootings at the Sikh temple in 2012, Tahil decided to become very involved with interfaith literacy and education. Today, he's one of 3 interfaith ministers in residence at the Episcopal Diocese of Los Angeles. He's also coordinator for Sadhana, a coalition of progressive Hindus. He serves on the Interfaith Youth Core for the Parliament of the World's Religions. And he's also a contributing author to a number of books. He's contributed to Co-Human Harmony, Using Our Shared Humanity to Bridge Divides. He's contributed to Hindu Approaches to Spiritual Care, Chaplaincy in Theory and Practice. And he's also written in the book Acting on Faith, Stories of Courage, Activism, and Hope Across Religions. So tonight our theme is going to be exceedingly topical, given that we have an impeachment trial going on. We are going to talk about civic engagement and universal values and how we can apply them in the social arena. And with that, Tahil, I pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I appreciate starting off with a Hindu hymn that's translated to English that I think is very relevant to the light and the heart and the spirit of what we're trying to bring into this space. So I appreciate all of you being here. It's indeed a very uniquely challenging time for us in 2021, completing our first year in the midst of a pandemic and facing a second impeachment trial happening at the national level. And for most people who I have encountered in the space that I work in at the United Religions Initiative, a lot of it is, pushed to the side for the most part. Some for valid reasons where people do not want to cause controversy or divide, and others because there's just still a disinterest in the political and civic nature of how we engage with faith communities. And I am usually invited to those spaces to basically rip those theories apart, because I have a deep sense of disappointment when I hear that people don't want to engage in politics. It's not because I don't know the current situation of politics. I think it's volatile and it can be disgusting. And if we can tell by anything that's going on right now, it can be so partisan that you can't tell if we're in the same country anymore. But that's precisely why communities of faith and spirituality and moral conscience actually need to engage in these spaces, because we're trying to fortify the ability to be a democracy rather than shred it apart. I started doing this work because of something very political that happened. A man who was a neo-Nazi went into a Sikh temple and attacked my community. The neo-Nazi white supremacist movement has been around for decades and centuries and has shown its impact in ways that we continue to see as being audacious. And it was a reminder to me that I can step back and be fearful and hateful and disgusted and step away from the spaces and never enter again. But it is my faith traditions that remind me that I have to be more engaged than I ever was before. The Sikh nature of how we engage in politics is not because we want to be partisan, but it's because we attend to the space for justice without fear and hatred of others. And in the Hindu nature of interconnectedness, we are reminded that the condition of creation reflects who I am as a person. And if I'm not taking care of creation, I'm not taking care of myself. So rather than taking 2 steps back, I took 4 steps forward into doing community organizing and political engagement work with this interfaith lens. At first, I did a lot of focus on interfaith education because Hinduism and Sikhism continue to be traditions that are not very well known about. Hinduism being the exotic religion that's thousands of years old with a sensory overload of colors and statues, and Sikhism that is always misconstrued and misunderstood as being a part of Hinduism or Islam or this strange religion with people wearing turbans. I had to step into a lot of spaces as being that demystifier, the one who would be able to educate about the nuances and the practices and principles and the history of what those two traditions offered. But I actually couldn't do that as well as I thought because I was also initially not engaging in the political natures or the baggages of both of those traditions, which were, of course, very political situations that occurred in the history of both of those traditions. And when engaging in the context of the United States, it also meant talking about the decades of presence of these communities in the midst of discrimination and injustice, just as many other communities of color and indigenous communities faced on this land. What was I supposed to do when I came across politics? I unfortunately could not turn my head away. And this was before we entered the first term of the Trump presidency. It was all about making sure that people knew which communities I represented, that these communities were equally a part of the fabric of what we were engaging with. And it was equally an opportunity for me to remind my own communities that they have to fight for the justice of others too. Wisdom and justice are not a one-way transaction. They're a two-way street. And it became a really important part of how I engage in my personal practice of both of those traditions intersectionally. In a home where I grew up with both religions, I knew the pressure that was put on me to either choose one of those religions or to, just convert to Christianity because people were not comfortable. But I think it came with the opportunity to remind myself that I was born at an intersection for a reason and that I need to embrace it. That's why I've taken on the narrative of looking at intersectional justice as being a part of my faith traditions. In an interview that I did for the Associated Press last year, I made it very straightforward when I said, I don't think that I'm actually in prayer unless I'm in the public square fighting for the rights of others. And I don't feel like my prayers are answered unless they achieve their rights. That has been the nature of how I do my political work and how it's actually driven by me being an interfaith activist. One of the most powerful events that sort of drove me towards doubling down on this work was in 2018 when the American Friends Services Committee organized with the Poor People's Campaign and a number of different faith-based organizations to go to the US-Mexico border to protest against Border Patrol and ICE against the treatment of family separation by folks coming to the border. We walked about 1.5 miles on the beach to the very physical border where we had CBP officers basically stare us down with tear gas guns and a number of different other weapons. And we had about a couple of hour face-off, which is not in the same way that you're thinking that we were also weaponized. We were literally kneeling and praying and singing and doing all of the things that you usually do in communities of faith to protest the idea that families were being separated. It was the same day that the very first victim of family separation, I believe a 6-year-old girl, had passed away. And we didn't know that as we were at the border. But what ended up happening was we actually caused an international incident because the CBP officers pushed back against us, started throwing people on the ground, arresting them, escorting them off the part of the beach that we were at. And it was in front of every single media platform, from MSNBC, the Associated Press, and Time Magazine to Fox News, Breitbart, and then some. Everyone was there watching it. And it became a deep reminder of why there's such a fear around the idea that people of faith can show up and just practice what they preach, and it freaks everyone out. because you don't know what to do with people in that situation. What do you do with a priest that's kneeling and praying the rosary? What do you do with an imam who's lifting his hands to God and testifying? What do you do with a Hindu that's holding meditation beads and praying and holding a sign that's saying Hindus are against injustice? You don't know what to do in that kind of situation. And I feel like that's a very good tactic in trying to convince people that this is not always going to be a conversation about partisanship. This is always going to be a conversation on moral urgency. That is the reason why the interfaith movement needs to be so much more involved in this work. Because if you're talking about economics, the environment, land conservation, environmental sustainability, good governance, any topic that comes to mind where you don't feel like people of faith should be engaging, people should definitely be engaging. There's no question about it. It has to look like us as community organizers. It has to look like us lobbying in the halls of Congress and our state governments. It has to look like us marching on the ground. It has to look like us voting. It has to look like all of those things that seem like we are good citizens, because good citizenship is good faith. Those things are inseparable for people who are religiously and spiritually minded. And that continues to be a reality once we cross into what we now see as the Biden administration. I would rather forget what happened in the past 4 years, if I'm to be completely honest. But the problem with that mentality is I treat it as if I want to ignore it. But I know it's caused some very deep trauma that is generational. And it's now up to us to raise the standards and actually build on, better accountability. And not that the accountability should stay in the past, but that accountability and mutual accountability particularly remains the gold standard of how we go forward. With this administration in power, even if we among the majority have voted for this government to be in power, they still answer to us. And for us as people of faith to be honorable and conscionable in the way that we do our work, that means that this administration has to be held as high to a standard as the last one and the one before, and so on. And this becomes the constant reminder for me that this is where we have to be careful about becoming comfortable again. We often see this comfort as, oh, we've done our job and the voting has happened and we won, the new government is in and it's done. And I would like to invite all of you on the call to remember that we are not aiming for a culture of audacity, we are aiming for a culture of courage, which means you cannot be comfortable anymore. This discomfort is going to keep reminding us of the volumes of terrible things that have happened in our name, from the families that are still separated, from the damage that we've caused to the climate, from the partisanship that has renewed the wounds of harm against Black and Brown communities across the United States. This means we have to be stronger and at the same front more than ever before. So I invite you to be uncomfortable with that idea, with that mindset, and with that narrative, because it's what's going to keep reminding us that the work is not going to end, because we're aiming for a peace we've never achieved before. With a lot of blood on your hands, it's very hard to wash up if you're willing to ignore the damage that's been done in your name. And as someone who follows an interconnected nature from the Hindu and Sikh sides of my spirituality, there's a prayer that was said by the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, as he was on the literal battlefield against the tyranny of the Mughals. And he said, Deha Shiva par mohe hai shubh karman te tab ho na daro, which means, oh God, grant me this boon that I may never refrain from righteousness. That's the righteousness that we all have to live by. It's not the effort of a saint. It's the bare minimum standard to do good, to do what is righteous, to do what makes us better, so that we can do better and actually see a world that reflects that betterness together. Thank you.
Well, thank you. we here at the Oracle Institute are impassioned by the very same principles. We actually are a URI cooperation circle. So we're a local little ball of light in this pretty red zone down here. I mean, we're in a red zone. And so we feel very grateful that we have this connection to a large organization like United Religions Initiative, and that we can reach out to people like Tahil to give us inspiration and keep us going. But we very much agree with everything you just said. And at the local level, we tend to be the group that organizes, if there's a local march, a climate march, or a women's march theme going on, we tend to be the group here that spearheads that. And so I'm just gonna finish by saying I love what you said. Praying means being in the streets or being in the halls of Congress lobbying, and prayers are being answered or miracles are happening when laws change and people's attitudes change and we become a more pluralistic society. So thank you, Tahil.